What a pleasure to come back today and speak with everyone here. I stayed up half the night writing a spiritual joke. It's a real spiritual joke, and if you can remember all the parts of this joke, you're going to love telling it to friends. So here it goes. I had a plan. So that was the theme of this morning. Anyways, I had a plan for this talk, and this morning all of that changed. So here's the new updated version, and I'll be just as surprised as you by the end of it. So when I was about 19 years old, I was already 2 years into my tattoo career, and I had the fortunate blessing of meeting my mentor. And at the time, this was a big deal for me. I felt like I hit the big time, meeting someone that could teach me and show me the way. So I had this opportunity to go to Kingston and build 5 tattoo machines with my mentor. And I was going to spend the next week with him. So when I arrived, I was full of anticipation. I just couldn't wait to learn all this sacred knowledge of tattooing. And he said to me at the beginning of the week, he said, there'll be a test at the end of this. So I want you to pay attention to everything I'm saying here while we build these 5 tattoo machines. Take notes so you don't forget. So you'll do well on the test at the end of this week. So all week long, I learned about all the workings of a tattoo machine. There's 15 points of consideration. All kinds of minute little things set up on an XY axis, and I'm not going to bore you with all the details. So anyways, all week long, I take notes. At the end of the week, I've got my answer. Because he said to me midway through the week, he goes, I want you at the end of the week, tell me why these tattoo machines that we built together are better than anything you can buy. So I'm like, okay. So I got half the week to figure this out. So at the end, I was, like I say, I was ready. I had everything. All my I's were crossed and my T's were dotted. So he says, okay, I'm ready for your answer. Why is this tattoo machine better than anything you can buy? So I explained to him in intricate detail about capacitance and spring tensions and timing and speed and power and the geometry of the frame. And it just went on and on and on. And the longer I went, the more proud I was of myself for being such a great student. And when I was finished, and he so patiently sat there with me and listened to every component of it and nodded his head approvingly. But when I was finished speaking, he says, you don't get it. And my heart sank. Especially he sat there, he was approving everything I was saying. He says, I don't get it. What do I not get? He said, these machines, and he says, I'm going to tell you, these machines are better than anything you can buy because we love them. We loved these machines all week. We loved these machines into existence. What an incredible lesson to learn. I was a 19, 20-year-old little boy. And here I was sitting in front of a master already. I remember throughout that week sitting with him, and he taught me more about life and love, or maybe just as much about life and love as he did tattooing. And at that period of my career, I so desperately wanted love. I wanted approval. And he told me very early on, he says, all this love that you have for other tattooists, because I'm trying to hobnob with all the great tattooers and get in their good graces so I could be a cool tattoo guy just like them. He said, all this love that you have for these other tattooists, and I hear you talking about other people often. He said, give it to your clients. Give all that love. Save up all that love for your clients that sit in your chair. They're the ones that deserve it. Again, an incredible lesson to learn from this man at such an early point in my career. So this morning I was sitting on the beach and I had a plan. I had an agenda for today. I knew exactly what I was going to talk about. But again, that's a joke. So it just came to me that I'm going to open up this talk today a little bit and talk a little bit about love. And I'd also like to hear what your thoughts are on love, because I think it's an incredible subject that there's not enough words to cover the depth and beauty of it, nor can words touch it in a way that opens up how profound that it is. And like I was saying last night, love has everything to do with creation. It's rooted in creation. You know, if God was a piece of cloth, love would be the weave that holds that all together. You know, it's something that I continuously ask myself. Last night I was speaking about bottom to top processing. Famous psychologist E.J. Gibson, he created that term, bottom to top, going from what you don't know into what you do know. So love is one of those things that I query often. I constantly ask myself, what is love? Why am I loved? You know, I just ask these questions that my mind couldn't possibly answer. And what rises up gets sweeter and sweeter. The more I surrender to love, the more it affects my work. It affects my ability to create. It affects my ability to surrender everything I think I am to the process of creation. It's love that really gives me that superpower while creating. So to me, love it's often defined through the qualities. Love is patient, love is kind. You know, love is all these things. These are qualities of love, but the qualities of love do not touch what love really is. The qualities of love are a duality. You know, if there's patience, there's impatience. If love is patient, then there's a duality to patience. And the thing about love is there's no duality to love. Love has no opposite. It's everything. So we don't get to the core of what love is through defining it through the qualities. And I think what moves us into a deeper understanding of love is to understand that, you know, for me, to understand that love is a consciousness. It's a consciousness. It's a river that flows in me that never dries up. Sometimes it's running very fast and it's full. Sometimes it feels like it's getting low, but it never really is. It never runs out. It's a consciousness that lives inside of me. And the more I embrace this consciousness, like I say, my creations sort of mega evolve. Again, that was a piece that I shared last evening, that love will mega evolve your creations. And love creates the perfect environment in us to be in line with becoming the ultimate creators that we truly are. Each and every one of you here is a master creator. Look at all that you have created already. Look at everything in your life. Look at everything you've done. You've created that. You're a master creator. And it doesn't matter what you think the quality of these creations are. The fact that you created it makes you a master creator. Just take that in. Understand that there's no separation between you and creation. There's no separation between you and love. You have so much power. We all do. And I love that. I love that. I love watching people create. I'm always curious and ask people many questions. Who are you? What have you done in your life? What have you created? Because your joy just inspires my joy. So today's talk is about creating this environment in us that is more conducive for creation to have space to arise in us, so that we give the space for creation. It's already there. It doesn't need space. We need to set ourselves down so that we can find that space. So what keeps us distracted and away from that silence within that I was speaking about last night? And for me, the biggest obstacle, it was my mind. It was very close to me. It was in my own head. And it was constantly speaking. And the mind, like I said last night, is like an unwelcome guest. It's a tool at best that we need. But sometimes the tool gets so overused and becomes this obnoxious entity living in our heads. And the mind speaks so loud. If you walk into a room and there's a loud talker, if you ever walked into a room and somebody is just loud talking, I think we've had that experience. And you're trying to have a beautiful, intimate conversation with a friend sitting beside you, but the loud talker 20 feet away is interrupting your 2 feet of space. So the mind is like a loud talker in the room. And the voice that's talking in your mind is going at a certain decibel. And then the voice that speaks back to that voice in your head is even louder. It's like now you've got two loud talkers in the room. And that voice of silence in you is that intimate partner that you're sitting with, that you so desperately want to hear. And when we pay no attention to that voice in our head, one of those loud talkers goes away. And when we stop talking to that voice in our head that we think is us, the loudest speaker of all goes away and the room gets very quiet. In that space, there's such an expansive experience to go into. There's a depth of wisdom and beauty to discover. And going into that silent, still space is like different every time we touch it. It's like snowflake. There's no two snowflakes alike, and there's billions of them. And we'll have billions of experiences with that silent place within, and no two meetings will be alike. I remember when I was with the Ashaya monks, I'd be meditating and I'd have this really sweet experience. And so, okay, there's the benchmark. So every time I sit down to meditate, it's going to be just like that. And if it's not, I failed. Yeah, right. Every time we touch that silent place within us, it's going to be different. It's going to change. It's going to be new and brand new and shiny for this moment here, right now. I learned through the Ashayas that not to hang on to any one experience of that stillness within. Every day, the silence in me is a new speaker to listen to. It's a new guide. It's a guide and a mentor that's meant for right here, right now. Incredible. If you were on a world tour, wouldn't it be awesome to have a new tour guide every day that had profound wisdom and guidance and knew exactly what to do in every single moment of the tour? You say, okay, stop right here. Look at this angle, turn your head 1 degree. There it is. That's a perfect sunrise. That's like the guide we have within every day. It's a new guide, and it's constantly turning our head to see the new sunrise of each moment. And all we need to do is listen. We clear that space out, clear that thing out in the mind, the chatter. So when I speak about the mind, I'm speaking about the talking thing in your head. I know in the Ayurvedic tradition, mind has different meanings. So my meaning of my mind is just this thinking thing up here. So early on, when I joined the Ashaya monks, they said there's a distinct difference between thoughts and thinking. I never thought of that. Thoughts just arise, they come. We have no control over the thoughts that arise in our head. Have you ever thought about that? When a thought comes to you, it just arrives, and we can't control what thoughts come to us. And if you think you can, tell me what your next thought's going to be. You can decide what you're going to think about. I'm going to think about oranges for 2 hours, 20 minutes, and 10 seconds, and do that with that kind of timing. You can decide, you can think about anything, but you cannot decide the next thought that is going to arise in the next millisecond. So thoughts are not something that we can control. It's not something that we can force out of our experience. I remember sitting down to meditate, and I'm like, okay, so I'm not going to have any thoughts. That's another good joke at a meditation conference. Stopping our thoughts is like trying to stop a freight train with holding a toothpick. It's just not going to happen. You're not going to stop the thoughts in your head. So it brings me to the question that if you can't decide what your next thought's going to be, if you have no control over what thoughts are dropping into your head, what are your thoughts? Are your thoughts you? Not from my estimation. And see, that was my problem, is I thought that I was my thoughts. When the thought dropped into my head, I thought that was me. Oh, that's Ned. Hi, Ned. How you doing? And I would talk to it. Those thoughts were like my best friend because it was me. But the reality is that those thoughts, or my reality, is that those thoughts that were dropping into my mind are not me. It doesn't even come close to touching the reality of who and what I am. But most of my life, I was identified as these thoughts dropping into my head. And I believed that they were who and what I was. Now, the thing about thoughts, apparently there was a Harvard study done on thoughts. And in the study, they discovered that 80% of the thoughts dropping into our heads are negative. Now, the Ashaya monks taught me that. And when they told me that, I loved hitting the, no, that's not right. I hit the button. I'd say, no, hold on here. 80% of my thoughts are not negative. I'm not a negative person. They said, we didn't say you were a negative person. We said that 80% of the thoughts dropping into your head are negative. And I said, no, I can't accept that. They said, well, watch your mind. So I did. I'm that person. At the time, I was working in a paper box factory, and my job was to pile boxes. So it's a very gripping experience, piling boxes all day. I had nothing but time on my hands. So the one day, as I'm piling the boxes, I've got a little piece of paper and I put positive and negative. And I'm going to chart my thoughts today because I'm going to prove these crazy monks wrong. What do they know? So as I was piling away, a thought would drop in. And I'd see somebody, they'd walk by and they'd say, a drug addict. Oh, the thought just popped in. I didn't mean to think that or have that thought. Someone else will walk by and they'd say, loser, cheats on his wife. But the longer I went charting my thoughts, I started to feel bad. I'm like, oh my goodness. I think 99.9% of my thoughts are negative. I don't know if they're going to let me back in, the monks. They probably know. If they don't, Maharishi does. But it was such an alarm to me to see that so many of the thoughts dropping into my head were negative. And I quickly learned that I needed to put some space between me and those thoughts. I learned that I don't have to talk back to all those thoughts. And then there's that thing about thinking. Thinking is a choice. You know, when a thought comes in, you have to think about that. And I never thought about that in my life. Every time a thought would drop into my head, I felt subject to that thought. And the problem with being subject to the quality of your thoughts is that you're probably going to have a pretty crappy day. Because I know I was. 99.9% of my thoughts were negative. So I could wake up in the morning and bad thoughts, negative thoughts were coming into my head. And within seconds, I'm like, oh, it's a bad day. Don't talk to me. I need space today. Like those thoughts had so much control over the I, the big I. It had no control over that. I was choosing to acknowledge those thoughts as me. I was choosing to continuously talk back to those thoughts. And I didn't realize it was a choice to set them down. Challenge yourself with that. Can you last an entire day without talking back to the thoughts in your head? I challenge myself with that every day. It's my ongoing everyday practice. Am I perfect? No, absolutely not. I still catch myself chattering away and answering thoughts in my head. But the noise is far less than it ever used to be. It's an everyday, ongoing practice, and My assumption when I met these Ashayan monks and then I learned about thoughts and thinking that, I'd be this master and I would never have to be bothered by those little tiny things ever again. It was something I needed to learn once and I was done. No, it's an everyday, every moment practice for me. And it doesn't matter if I succeed or fail. There is no succeeding or failing. It's my practice. And sometimes I forget. Sometimes, most of the times I don't. So the nature of thoughts is that they may not be true, real, or mine. This was another thing that the Ashayan monks taught me, is that some thoughts are not true. And I'm like, how is that possible? And they say, well, sometimes they're not based in any sort of truth at all. Watch them, listen for them, you'll see. So I did. I started watching my thoughts, and I noticed that I could walk into a room and I could instantly have thoughts, oh, that person over there doesn't like me. I would have all these thoughts dropping into my head that there was a commentary that I wasn't good enough, that there was something wrong with me. I'd have all these thoughts that were dropping into my head that were not based on reality, they're based on assumptions, and they just weren't true. So that's the thoughts in your head and a portion of your thoughts will be not true. They're liars. They lie. They cannot be trusted. And then there's a portion of the thoughts that are dropping into your mind that are not real. So these thoughts are thoughts that are not about this present moment. And my teacher used to always say, there are no present moment thoughts. In the presence of this moment, there is just complete, utter silence. So a thought that's not real are the thoughts that are dropping in our head about the future, or the thoughts that arise about the past. And boy, did I have a lot of those. I think I spent maybe 40% of my time or 45% of my time thinking about the future and all the things that I wanted and needed to be good. And then 40 to 45, maybe even more, was thoughts about the past. I could be working away and a thought about my past would come up. And then off I would go thinking about it. And the problem with that is that at that period of my life when I was learning about all this, I was an angry person. I was rageful. I was telling the program coordinator just the other day that early in my career in tattooing, I'd be tattooing away and thoughts would start coming into my mind and I would get rageful. I would start having arguments and fights in my head. And I would get so angry while I'm tattooing some poor soul that I would black out. I'd be tattooing and I'd feel myself just suddenly go limp. Can you imagine? I'm not going to have a business when I get home if anyone's watching this. Or maybe all my early clients will demand their money back or so. I don't know. Boy, am I in trouble. Overshare. It says I do that. I would black out while I'm tattooing a person. That's worst case scenario. If you're getting a tattoo, your tattoo artist is sitting there in rage, blacking out. Holy mackerel. That's not good. Terrible. Bad. But that was the problem with my mind, is I was so lost in thoughts about my past, the things that I felt were my wounds, the injustices that were done to me. They did that to me. Why me? But these thoughts, I remember in my first book, I put this quote as, I've suffered the most terrible, horrific things, most of which never happened. And that was me in my head, bringing up the past or bringing up a future moment and explaining to myself how terrible things were going to be in the next 5 minutes. Or I could be having the time of my life. I could be in the middle of Disneyland. And next thing you know, I'd be thinking, 2 days, I got to be back at that stinking factory. Gosh, I hate that factory. I'd be having the time of my life, and my mind would come in and just ruin everything. So, understanding and learning that most of my attention was tied up in the past, in the future, I had very little time or attention on the presence of this moment. And that deeply affected my ability to create my life. It's kind of like if you were watching a movie, let me back up here. If you were in your thoughts of the future 45% of the time, and in thoughts about your past another 45% of the time, I'm not good at math. That'd be carry the ones divided by 3, 10. So 10% of you would be here now. 10% of you would show up in this moment. Now think about that. Let's imagine we watch a 2-hour movie. We watch, for 1 minute, and then fast forward 20 minutes. Watch for another minute, fast forward another 20 minutes. We do that. By the end of the movie, we've got 4 to 6 minutes of time in on this movie. Would you be able to tell me what that movie contained? Would you know what the movie was about? And when I was lost in my thoughts in the past and future, I thought I knew exactly what life was about, but I only knew about 10%, if that. So we become powerful creators when we draw back all of that attention that we're giving to the past and future. We pull that back in, and we use all of that energy for the presence of this moment arising now. As I was speaking last night, creation happens as a live feed. Our purpose in life is happening at a live feed. Right now, this is my purpose. In 2 hours, my purpose is going to be radically different. Life is constantly coming at us in the presence of this moment, and we're creating our lives from the presence of this moment. And to be the most powerful creators, we have to be here in the presence of this moment. And there's so much power, there's so much mystery and wonder arriving at our feet if we're present enough to catch it. I remember writing a quote one time, and it was, in between all our greatest moments, the miracles are still happening. Our life isn't a highlight reel, and Facebook might tell you otherwise, that your life is all these peak moments, but your life is made up from the sum of all the moments that we have collectively. Anybody have any questions about anything so far?
So I wonder where these thoughts are coming from. Here in the ashram, we hear all indeed is Brahma, all indeed is divine. So why do we have this brilliant mind, and 80% minds putting 80% of these negative, bullshitting, mean thoughts in our mind.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I really wonder why this is. I mean, sure, to work with and to transform and transcend, but why are they? Where are they coming from?
I'm glad you asked that question because you're gonna get an answer on that. When you do, please let me know. I think there's sort of a resonance and a buildup to all the things that we're hanging on to. We go through our lives and there's a resonance and buildup from, and when we have an emotion about something, there's such an energetic response that happens around us, and it builds up in our ethos around us, and it becomes this mini consciousness, which is real, but it's not. It's kind of like the nature of the soul. It's real until it's not. And at a certain point of consciousness, it disappears. So the thoughts are real, and what makes them real is the attention that we give them. So they build up in us, and they create this environment around us, and then these little thought soldiers are pulling in all the other thoughts of other people, drawing them to us. It's like, hey, there I am. Let's bring these two together, and it reinforces our belief in these thoughts that are just randomly dropping into our head. And the most important part to me to understand is that it doesn't make up the sum of who I am. It's not me. It might have been me in a different story, different lifetime, but it's not me right here, right now. And as soon as a thought drops in, if we don't touch it, from where does it go? It goes back wherever it came from. It just keeps moving through us. So thoughts move. They continuously move through us. The ones that stay are the ones that we grab onto. And if you find a better answer, which I'm sure you will, because that was like total trash.
Yeah.
But if you find a better answer, please let me know.
On my way. Yeah. Thank you.
It's actually not a question, it's a comment, and what do I know? But I think we're human beings and we're animals, just like, in nature. When you think back to like the caveman, when we come out of our place of safety, the first thing that we look for is danger. So I think negative thoughts are just kind of inherent. When it comes to thoughts is that when I notice I may not be responsible for the first thought that I have, but I am responsible for the second thought after that. Does that make sense?
Okay.
It sort of goes back to that saying by Viktor Frankl. When stimulus and response, there's a space. In that space lies our power to choose our response. And in our response lies our growth and our freedom.
Mm-hmm.
So if I notice a negative thought, I can change that thought, or I can sort of resonate with you. I don't think.
Yeah, I understand what you're saying. And from my experience, we can't change what the next thought's going to be. And maybe, possibly, you're saying we could change how we think about that thought. When the Yeshayas said that 80% of my thoughts were negative, and I did that little test, I started charting my thoughts and got really embarrassed. I remember thinking, okay, I'm smart. I'm gonna change when a negative thought comes in. I'm gonna insert a positive thought. I'll show them. There'll be no more 80% of negative thoughts in me. But the problem with exchanging one thought for another thought is that it leaves you stuck in your mind. And my practice with the Ashaya monks was not to abandon my mind or to throw it away because it's a useful tool, but rather change my relationship with my mind. And so exchanging a negative thought for a positive thought leaves you trapped in the mind. And I know that that wasn't the place that I was going to find the true source of love in me. My mind wasn't the place that was going to be the thing that I explored to find this ever-present silence that resides in me. And that there was something much bigger than my mind that was at play and alive in me. And I desperately wanted to get to that place. So the mind's kind of like if you were a roofer and putting on new roofs for people, there would be a certain amount of things you would need. If you strip off the old shingles and you notice the plywood's a little spongy, you put some new sheets of plywood down. So if you're a roofer, you might need a table saw to cut these sheets of plywood, hammer, nails, shingles. So, but if you're once you've cut all those sheets of plywood and you're going to resheet the roof before you lay down the new shingles, you wouldn't carry the table saw on your back while you're trying to nail shingles. We do that with the mind. The table saw is a tool, a much needed tool, but when it's not needed, you would leave it back on the ground. You wouldn't carry it up. And like I say, we do that with the mind. We carry the mind into so much of our life that it's not needed. It's like trying to take a taxi to your living room when you're in your bedroom. You don't need for that. We carry the mind into everything. And there's so few times when I actually need my thinking mind, or most of what I need out of my mind is happening on its own accord. And the commentary is completely unnecessary. I don't really have to think about how to make eggs in the morning. I can just do that. So the thoughts that are not yours. Now this was another time when I hit the bull crap button with the Ashayas, and I said, no, there's nobody's thinking in my head. And they said, no, seriously, a good portion of the thoughts that come into your head are not yours. I'm like, well, whose are they? Say, good question, watch your mind. And I'm like, watch your mind, I have enough of this. That was their answer to everything. They didn't have to be smart at all.
Find your parents.
Yeah, you find your parents in your mind. You'll find everything there, everything you've been through. So I thought, no, this is my thoughts. They're me, they're mine. Nobody's in my head. They're my thoughts. They're nobody else's. So as I watched my mind, I suddenly realized that there were hundreds of thoughts coming to me. There's things in my head that, I had a friend that would say mean and awful things to me. And I'm not quite sure why he would do that, but he would say the meanest things to me. And he may have only said that once or twice or maybe a handful of times. But in my mind, I replayed that thousands and thousands of times. I struggled with some of the things that this friend of mine would say to me for years. I held on to it. And I was flabbergasted when I looked at how many thoughts that were arising in me that were other people's words. And when I was just completely watching my mind as a witness, I could see that that's not my thought at all. However, when I was unconscious to it, it's like I couldn't separate myself in that thought. And then I realized very quickly there's a good portion of these thoughts that are not mine that are not worth thinking about. And I tied up so much time and energy thinking about these thoughts that were not even my thoughts. And in fact, a lot of the thoughts that come in a fierce repetition were the most mean and awful things that other people had said. I rarely held on to the nice things and all the beautiful experiences I had in between all those awful experiences. So how do we back up from the mind so that we change our relationship with it? How do we make our mind a tool that we use instead of it using us? And I think of the mind in this way. If you go to the movies and you're watching an epic love scene on the in the movie, when the lights come back on, is that screen wet? Like, or is it not wet? Is the screen full of lust if you watch an underwater movie, is the screen wet when the lights come back on? No, it's completely white. It's completely unaffected. It's blank, back to the state before the projector projected onto the screen. So I think of my mind as a screen. It's completely blank. It's like the white movie screen. The thoughts that are projected on my mind and the thinking that colors those thoughts so colorfully don't have to stick. And the thing that helps me learn that my mind is just a screen, and I don't have to be subject to that. I don't have to, if I'm having angry thoughts, doesn't mean that I'm angry. If I'm having sad thoughts, doesn't mean I'm happy or sad. If I'm having happy thoughts, doesn't mean I'm happy. This beautiful space within me is all of that, but none of it. And I think what helps us learn how to become that screen or the witness that watches the mind is that we don't identify so heavily with the feelings or the emotions running through our body. Because there's the mind and then there's the emotions that arise, and they sort of play on each other. And often people say, I can't stop thinking, I can't stop feeling this anxiety that's coming up in me. We haven't learned how to master watching those thoughts. And so our feelings reinforce the thoughts and make them even stronger in us, creating a stronger belief and making them more real than they truly are. So we transcend the mind by watching it, and we help ourselves, but we have an ability to make that much easier when we do the same with our feelings and emotions. So our emotions are just information. Same as the thoughts dropping into our head. It's just information. If we're watching it, we can know in a split second whether that's information that's necessary for this moment here right now. And that's how I determine whether I'm going to think about any of the thoughts dropping into my mind. Is that necessary for this moment here right now? And I think that's a big distraction when I talk about emotions. It's a massive distraction for the masses to stay stuck, lost in their bodies, lost in their minds, kind of bouncing between the two. Remember when I was reading the book I Am That by Nisargadatta? In that book, there was a phrase that between the banks of pain and pleasure, the river of life flows. The idea is not to get stuck at the banks. Let come what comes and goes what goes. That line in his book is seared into my mind. It's instructions for learning how not to be trapped and attached to the feelings and thoughts that arise in me. And in turn, it's been an incredible tool to help me create. So the other thing that I wanted to touch on today was the divine feminine and the divine masculine. This is a topic that I feel like is going to be a book for me someday. I don't quite understand enough, or I'm not ready. The information has not come forward for me to write an entire book about this. But there was in my second or third last book, Awakened, The Reality of What Is, when I was writing that book, the last two chapters were about that. What is the divine masculine and divine feminine? So 2 chapters came through. But for me, while I was writing that book, they were some of the most powerful chapters I've ever written. But I still don't really understand what was written. I'm still trying to go to the silence and just listen. And the information, more information will arise when I'm ready. But what I can say about the divine masculine and the divine feminine is that there are 2 qualities that live in us. You know, growing up, I talked a little bit about my mom and my dad last night, and I just briefly mentioned them. My mom was a master of love. She loved so fiercely. She's still with us, and she still loves just as fiercely. My dad was an incredible master creator. So intelligent. He was a leader among men. Always leading. I learned so much from him. But they were also bikers. And they loved the party. It was, this real hardcore manly environment that I grew up in. And, when you're 15 years old and you're surrounded by bikers all the time, and I think by 15 I could drink a whole case of beer myself. I thought that I had to be a man, and I thought that this is my gender, I am a man, and I will do manly things, and that's the way it's going to be because all the other men around me are doing that, and that's the way it is. But I realized the longer I tried to be my gender, to be a man, just a man, and what I thought that was, the more I struggled. So there's a distinct difference between your gender and the masculine and feminine qualities that reside in us. And I think that's extremely important to understand. Your gender has nothing to do with the divine masculine in you, nor does it have anything to do with the divine feminine in you. It's completely independent of your gender. So if we look at our lives and we look at the qualities of the divine masculine and the divine feminine, I could see how I was completely in the divine masculine side in some ways, but I was also completely out of balance with that divine masculine. And what brought me out of balance with that divine masculine in me was that I wasn't in balance, in or out of balance with my divine feminine. It was there always, but I wasn't in touch with that. There's two sides to this here. In my book, Awakened, The Reality of What Is, this chart kind of came into my mind to make this chart. And it's explaining, and this is just touching the tip of the iceberg on this topic. And you have to bear with me. Come back in a few years or maybe 100 years and I'll be able to do this talk a lot better. But this chart, to me, as I go back over this, I find so much wisdom and I learn so much from it. And that's very common with the writing that I do, because a lot of it's arising out of that stillness in me. The writing and the work that comes through is much smarter than me. Trust me, I'm a hick from Ingersoll. Parents were bikers. So there's the same divine wisdom in you resides in me. We all have this crazy intelligence built inside of us. We know everything. It's all in there. So this chart was a little sliver of wisdom that came up, and I'm constantly learning from it. So in this chart, I've got masculine attributes in balance. So these are qualities, and I think there's more qualities. And much like love, I think you can't define this by its qualities, but these are maybe a few ideas. When I look at the masculine out of balance, or in balance, the first one is powerful. Absolute power. Out of balance is forceful and dominant. And I can find myself in these qualities. I was always task oriented, but I had a narrow view. Out of balance, being task oriented, and out of balance is having this narrow view where the end is the most important thing, and that we lose ourselves until the end. We're fighting and struggling to get to the end of something, and that's something to remember when you're in the midst of creating. If you're creating a thing, for me as an artist, being a painter, a tattoo artist, I can't be fixated on the end. I have to be completely aware and present. And I have to be task oriented too. I have to be willing to sit with this task. It's a powerful trait. But if I'm only focused on getting finished, the art is not nearly as good as it could be. I remember in my tattoo studio, I apprenticed a few tattooists, and I had this one young apprentice, and boy was he funny. He was a funny guy, and I remember early on watching him, and he was so keen to get to the next step. He wanted to get to the next step in his apprenticeship so he could start tattooing. He's like, when am I going to tattoo? I'm like, Scott, it's only been 3 weeks. This is kind of a 6-month, 1-year program. And then when he started tattooing, it was so funny to watch because he'd get halfway through the outline and he'd want to be shading the tattoo. You could look at his work and see where his focus dropped off. He started rushing. The outline at the beginning of the tattoo at the bottom would be just beautiful, and as the further you went up, the more sketchier and fluffy the lines were. And then he'd get halfway through shading the tattoo, and he'd want to be coloring it. So you'd watch where the shading was really great, and then it just got non-existent or not very great. And then the color was the same thing. So that's just one little story I can pull from looking at these qualities. I urge you to just spend a little bit of time, go through all these qualities of the divine masculine and feminine, and find your stories. Find, is this working for me? Does this work for my life? Does this quality rise up in me that doesn't work for my life? And I think that you'll find that there's a degree of wisdom just by looking at these qualities in and out of balance that will help you move the creations in your life, help you draw out the wisdom that resides deeply in you, and maybe teach. It certainly taught me how to handle the moment I'm in. Does anybody have any questions?
Hello.
Hello.
Do you balance them out by becoming aware of them? Or are there other ways that you work to balance yourself?
Yeah, like as soon as if I look at these qualities in and out of balance and I notice that, I'm being forceful or dominant, and I can find myself being forceful and dominant in many situations. I could be standing in line at breakfast and suddenly be forceful and dominant, and I just notice, I'm like, hold on, I'm trying to push ahead here. Just hold back. Be gentle and kind. So yeah, it's these qualities in and out of balance will pop in and out of my mind frequently. And it's like, oh, I'm doing that thing again. And sometimes there's a little bit of information there to unpack. Why, for me, I always had to be first. If I wasn't first, I was last. I needed to feel special. Where does that come from? And so certain behaviors that we find that we're doing out of these qualities are worth tracing back a few steps. When did this begin?
I just had a very strange thought, and I don't know, is it mine, is it real? I don't know. But this got me thinking about gender fluidity and how it's such a major thing in our consciousness right now. And I'm wondering, this just came up in my mind, could this be because we're going into a divine feminine time, going away from patriarchy to normal matriarchal societies? Wondering if this is all coming together somehow. And what do you think about that?
Yeah, I have thought about that. I think that we're moving into a time where the feminine is rising up, and we so desperately need that. I honor these feminine qualities in me so dearly, and I honor it in all the people. We need that creative power. The feminine is so important and rooted into this world. What it represents is just incredible, and I think through the feminine there will be so much healing and growth in this world. But it's not about squishing down the masculine and raising up the feminine. It's being in balance with both. And I think that's the time that we're being called to. Again, that's the importance of just maybe putting a little bit of consciousness on what is the divine masculine and feminine in you. Not that long ago, I had a client come in, and I can't remember if he was a she or she was a he. They were transgender, and now I think they're non-binary. I don't know all the right terminology. And so as I'm tattooing this person, I did this beautiful tattoo that represented their journey of moving through their experiences when they changed their name, they changed, they had top surgery and different things. So I made all these significant points in the tattoo that represented those changes that the person went through. And so as I was tattooing this person, I asked him, I said, tell me what it means to be non-gender or non-binary. I'd like to understand that more. And his response, or her response, or their response was, that I'm not defined by my gender. It doesn't make up who I am, and I'm tired of being forced having that label forced upon me. And that we're none of us are that gender. Yeah, we're born in a gender, but that's not you. And maybe the 19 or 18-year-old me would have just made fun of that person or squished out that person and thought this is all bull. But what they were telling me is my own beliefs. We're all one. They had their own dialogue to say the things that I say, that we say, that's been said in this ashram all since I got here. We're all one. We're all love. And so the people have all these opinions on what their thoughts are about other people's choices and how they think it affects them. But I think there's a portion, not all, but there's a portion of people that are going through that experience of dropping identity and no longer identifying as a certain gender. There's a certain portion of them that understand the depth of who they are, maybe not as exponentially as they will, but they're telling us something. It's a sign of something. If something shows up, look beyond the thing. What does it represent? And I think it's incredibly important and special what's happening. And we don't need to put labels on it. This is a good thing or this is a bad thing. It really doesn't matter. If it's happening, it's by the grace of God.
Yeah, thank you. That was beautiful. I agree. I think it's all about healing and humanity starting to go into the ascension period. And this is all necessary. It's all part of it.
Yeah.
You said good. But you said don't judge good or bad.
No,
but I think it is part
that's
of the
fine.
good. We can't help it.
Yeah, it's just language. Yeah, no, I think you're right. I think it's very good. I think it's a positive sign in that sense. I think it's important just to continuously watch what's happening and not respond so much in your mind, but respond with your heart, respond with love and gratitude for what is.
I'm very curious to hear your perspective on this. But when I look into managing my mind and the strategies I use, I find that certain strategies will work very well for a given amount of time, let's say a few weeks. And then more time passes and that strategy seems to wear out. Do you find yourself going through multiple strategies even at this later stage of your spiritual journey? Or does it one strategy really stick with you in terms of managing your mind?
Mm-hmm. My time with the Ashaya monks was really about changing my relationship with my mind. So you could use your words, change my strategy with my mind. So what I found is that there was so much inertia behind the thoughts that were constantly streaming through my head and the things that I was thinking about. And think of it this way: if a motor is running and it has no brake, when you shut the switch off, the motor keeps running until it spins out. Once the centrifugal force is eliminated out of that, the inertia is gone and it comes to a stop. We're literally addicted to the things that we think about. We're literally addicted to the thoughts and the feelings that we have. The feelings wash over our body and it produces a chemical result. If you think about chocolate, there's a chemical reaction in your body. And we're addicted to the thoughts that we think. We're addicted to our behaviors. So the base is the simplest way I can talk about addiction. So there's inertia. There's a lot of momentum to things that we've been thinking about all of our lives. And when you stop thinking about something, it's like you're breaking up with your life. What's a breakup like? It sucks. You feel out of sorts. You feel uncomfortable. Change something in your life and see how comfortable you feel. Come to an ashram at the beginning. You're breaking up with your life. And the ashram is like one of the most amazing things you could do for yourself. But by the third day, you're like, you might be going through your worst nightmare. So, and the problem with the inertia of our thoughts and behaviors and the relationship that we currently have with our mind is like the motor. If you switch it off, that's you deciding, I'm not going to think about this anymore. I'm not going to behave in a certain way. And you switch off that and it's still spinning in you. And it spins for a while. And it maybe it'll spin the rest of your life. And you have to become very vigilant not to flip the switch on. But if a motor is still spinning and burning out all of its momentum and inertia, and you flip the switch back on, how fast does that motor come right back to full speed? It's almost instant. If the motor is already in motion and you flip it back, the power back on, it's instantly there at full speed again. And that's the problem with change. You know, I've written quite a bit about change, and this is what we're talking about, is changing the relationship of our mind. Change happens sometimes by the decision to make that change, by making that decision thousands of times. In my book, I have different phases of working through change and breaking it down step by step. But ultimately, we have to go back to that first step of making that decision constantly. And when we notice that we flip the switch back on our old thoughts and behaviors and the way we feel, we just go back over and say, no, not today, not in this moment. And we just continue to do our best. And eventually, the inertia does burn out. Last night I said, when we continuously make the choice of love, eventually everything in our life is a result of that choice. And love has the power to burn out the most powerful inertia of the mind. Well, guys, time's up. Thank you so much thank you to the audio team. And a huge thanks to the ashram for allowing me to come and be part of this stage. Also, I have a few people that helped get me here. My dear friend Jaya, I'm so incredibly thankful for all the help. Raj Prem, Yogi Raj and Prem, they also helped get me here, and my incredibly amazing wife. You know how I feel, but they don't, so hello. Thank you so much for everything.